So, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Schwartz. I am with the law firm of Haldenstein, Adler, Freeman, and Herz, and run our real estate department. Have been there, I am really shocked to say, for close to 28 years, and have been practicing in the representing co-ops, condos, building owners during that time. Have done, beginning of my career, did some litigation work, but mainly transactional work. First thing I'd like to say is I'm relieved because I walked in and I saw this thing and I thought you were going to swab me before I started talking, but so I know that's not going to happen. And then the other thing I have to point out is that I did hear when Howard mentioned that the date of reckoning is April 20th. That date has two meanings for me. One, a negative, and one, a positive. One, it's Adolf Hitler's birthday, that clearly being the negative. The other being that it's my mother's birthday, that clearly being the positive. So it's a date that I will not forget. And on this other side note, always good to see Howard, because Howard and I used to talk on the phone constantly. And then one year I went to a building that we represented for an annual meeting, and there was Howard in the audience and stood up and introduced himself, so I finally got to see the face behind the phone calls. That was a long time ago.
A couple of years.
So more than a couple. So Margie has asked me just to touch on for a few minutes what might buildings take positively from a strike. Probably not that much. But there might be a few things that you can accomplish if a strike were to happen and if you have to enlist people in the building to volunteer, primarily like we've been talking about, to act as doors, to stand guard at the door, maybe to run elevators in buildings that have elevator operators. The garbage removal part is not something anybody really wants to do, but sometimes you have no choice. Just a few points that I kind of have always told buildings, because I've been went through in 91, went through in 96. We were particularly helpful, I think, to many of the buildings that we represent and a lot of the management companies who we work with. And I would say clearly the number one thing, you tell buildings this all the time, and I go to, especially this time of year, countless number of annual meetings, because this is what we call meeting season, and my kids even know that after all these years. But the common complaint that you hear is that the boards are not communicating. So in this situation, in the possible strike situation, the thing that I would tell you most to tell your buildings, whether you're managing them or you're on the board, is to communicate, communicate, communicate. And that means communicate before any of this stuff is going to happen. Because I would bet you that many people in the buildings that you're involved in don't even know it's possible that a strike is coming up. So call a meeting now and find out, educate them, tell them this might be happening, we hope it's not going to happen, and certainly provide them with what you think is going to be the blueprint in the unfortunate event that it does happen, so that they know in advance what might be coming down the pipe. The other thing that I think is really important is that you find out from the people who work at the building now, the porters and the people who are involved, who might go on strike. But again, as I said to Howard, I don't think, and in most cases, they are not looking to hurt the residents of the building. These are employees who've been there for a long time. They've developed relationships with the people who live in the building. They don't have a beef in most cases with the people who live in the building. They might have a beef with the owners because the owners aren't coming around and agreeing to what they demand, but they want to see the residents protected. And I think what's really critical is that you find out from these people who in the building are those who might need extra help if something were to go wrong, if there's an emergency, if there's a fire and they know that a person is disabled or in a wheelchair and can't get out of their apartment on their own, so that the people in the building who might have to take over and be doing the kinds of things that the employees usually do know and have a list and can run out and help the people who need help. The other thing is, in terms of communication with where we're on now, a lot of buildings have these building link systems or other patio communication systems, but find out how it is to best communicate with everybody in the building and make sure they are hooked up to those communications so that if a strike does occur, the communication is easier. You don't have to run around slipping notes under everybody's door, and the communication aspect is easy. And finally, lastly, we've talked about what might you be doing in advance. If a strike were to happen, the security companies are going to be very, very busy. So my advice always is to line somebody up in advance, almost like make a reservation. Even if it costs you a couple of dollars and you have to put a down payment down, you're going to want to have that company in place come April 21st if there's a strike, and you don't want to be on the phone the morning of April 21st trying to line up a security guard and then telling you they don't have any people left because they're all assigned to the buildings. So I think to make advanced preparations is really, really, really critical. So the other thing Margie again asked me to talk about is what might you gain from having this strike? In other words, how do we make what I think it's called lemonade out of lemons, turn lemons into lemonade? So what you can do is you can try to find out what's going on in your building a little bit easier than you might be able to find out in the normal course of just the employees running the building, right? Because like I said, the employees very often have allegiance to the residents. They don't want to report somebody who might be doing something against the rules. That might affect their Christmas tip. That might affect something that the resident is helping out them in the course of a year. But now you have people in the building who were volunteering, and you might be able to use those people to find out if somebody is illegally subletting, if somebody is allowing an occupant who is in the building who shouldn't be in the building, if there's some type of illegal activity going on in the building that perhaps has to stop and that somebody's been complaining about and that you've never had the ability to prove. So how do you find that out? Basically what you're going to do in most of these cases is when you have a resident who's been volunteered to serve and to sit at the door, first of all, the resident's going to have perhaps some familiarity with people who are coming in and out. They're also going to be able and might easily justify keeping a log at the front door and having people sign in and out. Often in the regular course when this doesn't occur, people object, people don't want to know who is coming in and out of the building. But when you have a non-employee working there, I think it's very justifiable to say we're going to have a log, we're going to keep track of who's coming in and who's going out, so that can be reported back to the board, and you have an easier time justifying that. Construction work, that's a very big problem in building, people doing work in an apartment without the permission of the board. So now you're going to be in a situation where a contractor is going to show up if they're prepared to cross the picket line and want to get into the building, and now the person, the volunteer, is going to be able to see what type of work is going on in an apartment that wasn't approved. So that's probably the area that you might be able to best be able to find out about in this type of situation. None of this is really good, but if you can use it and take it to find out whether there is an illegal activity, if there is a bed and breakfast being run, if there is illegal construction going on, that might be one good thing that you could take out of this whole situation. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
If we could just hold off on people missing. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. That was excellent. And while we're on the topic of the union, I just want to call to your attention that they are now taking registrations for the spring class, which starts in a couple of weeks. And they have a booth here, which is towards the end of aisle 500. And you can get information and probably could sign your staff up for one of the many classes of which your staff can now get a property management certification through 32BJ. Some years back, they called me in to actually restructure and recreate many of their management courses, and through that effort, we've set up now that the 32BJ members going through a very lengthy course process can achieve the New York Accredited Realty Management certification. And so as you hear about where the money is going during these negotiations, very little of that, you'll verify, goes towards the school. And what has happened is that they have taken that little pot of money and through grants and funding and writing applications for all this over the last 10 years or so, they have, where they used to have this budget and that was the budget they used to run the school, now they take that budget and they really have expanded on the amount of money that they use for the school. So the best thing that you can do after all this is over with the strike preparation is to encourage your staff to take these classes.
Can I just hit that topic?
Absolutely.
So, and I very briefly touched on it, but then I said I talked about the funds. There's a training fund that employers in the industry participate in. It costs about 9 cents an hour for that, and you pay that for all of your employees based on a 40-hour work week. You pay it whether your employees use the school or whether your employees don't use the school. So if you think that your employees are somewhat deficient, there are about 150 different courses that the school offers. Part of our proposal to the union was actually to expand some of the courses in the school, and the two suggestions that we had were for employees to take courses in spotting elder abuse, and I think this gets into a little bit what Jeff had touched on. You know, during the strike, you're going to have people who are infirm or vulnerable. You should be aware of that. But even during non-strike time, it would be helpful for you as building owners to identify those folks and to make sure everything's going well with those folks. So we have a proposal on that type of course offering, as well as a course offering to spot discrimination, employment discrimination in the workplace, and there are various case law from the U.S. Supreme Court on down as to if you train people and have programs and so on, that could in many cases insulate employers for liability. We also have, believe it or not, a proposal to expand the number of college scholarships and graduate school scholarships that we offer. So this type of stuff was pretty well received. It's not normally that employers make proposals to actually make things better for the employees, but we are actually looking to do that. And I think that making it better for the employees will ultimately make things better for the employers.
And just a note on the elder abuse program, I no longer teach the human relations class, but when I did, I was asked to allow it to be brought in as kind of a test basis, and that started about 7 years ago, but it was just one class. And what I found was it taught empathy to the staff. So even though the topic was elder abuse, they all went out completely enlightened on this empathy for everyone. So it really benefited.
A couple of comments, but I want to touch on what you just mentioned. I don't know if everyone is aware. Along with the training fund, it was news to me, we've used the service at our site. Where you have 10 or more members at a particular site, certain courses can now come to the site. The members do not have to go out. For example, we incorporated a customer service class. So there are 4 or 5 different variations of that we can take advantage of, and it was well received, as you mentioned, and it was very good to have it done on site. You can get, most cases, 90% of the staff there or more. A question I forgot to ask Mr. Rothschild. The last contract was 4 years. Prior to that, we had 3 years. Is there anything on the table to get this maybe at a 5-year or a 6-year span to get this pendulum from swinging all the time over us? Has that, come to the table?
Historically, union contracts were always 3 years, pretty much
Right.
3 years. The reason for that is, as part of the federal labor law, there are contract bars where other unions can't come in if there's a contract in place and there's a 3-year agreement. If you go longer than 3 years, the contract bar provision no longer applies. So for, I don't know, maybe 70 years, we were doing
Three.
basically 3-year agreements, pretty much. In 2006, we went to a 4-year agreement, and I remember sitting up at 2 o'clock in the morning in the hotel room, trying to figure out, if we were ever going to have coterminous contracts, because we have, as you know, 32B residential and then 32B commercial, and we deal with lots and lots of other unions and even other bargaining groups within 32B, like security guards and window cleaners and other groups. And in addition to that, there's a group in the Bronx, the BRAB, that has a contract that generally ran 1 year behind us. So our focus was not to have situations where there were coterminous contracts, meaning this is big enough already, we have 30,000 folks. We didn't want the contract for 4 boroughs of New York expiring with the 5th borough of New York and some other major agreement. We went to a 4-year deal. So far it's working. Believe me, I would like it too. I can do this once every 5 years or 6 years instead of once every 4 years. But the truth of the matter is, with economic circumstances that change relatively quickly, it's sometimes hard to get the union to want to do it. I've done 6-year agreements with other unions in other jurisdictions, but there's usually some special circumstance, like there may have been the contract may have been expired for a year or 2 at the time, or there may have been some major project going on in the building and the employer was willing to pay extra to have labor peace because they needed the folks to engage with contractors, etc. So I think, at least for the time being, there's no plan to do anything more than 4 years. And the proposal on the table, both by the union and the RAB, for this current new agreement will be for a 4-year agreement. Will that change 4 years from now? I don't know, but I suspect it probably won't.
Well, I'd just like to also say, I'd like to commend you and your staff at the RB as well as the local 32BJ. Not to take away from your predecessor, but what I've noticed, the tone, the rhetoric, if you will, for lack of a better word, isn't there. Things are much more reasonable and much more professional, let's say, over the last 6 years or so, plus or minus, and that's appreciated, I think, from both sides, and it makes a difference in how we move forward. So you are to be commended, as well as the leadership over there. It's noticeable, it's evident, and I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
So, any other questions, or any of the other speakers want to add a comment? NYARM's Expo is on October 29 until Wednesday, and it will be at the Hotel Pennsylvania. So that's a whole day of seminars and certification credit. Everyone that's here, if you are looking to work towards a New York Accredited Realty Manager certification, being here today, you have accumulated time to that. So please get in touch with me to find out what other credit you may have that applies to it. And the other thing is, Jeffrey did hold this up, so I don't want you to fear that we've been testing the room before you got in. But it is one of the ways that NYARM has found that we can raise funds, in addition to selling advertising and running expos and awards dinners and such. But there is a lab that you mail this to, and you can take a sample. It's not for lead or asbestos. It's for if you have mold, or if there's Legionnaires suspected, or bed bugs, or anything that grows, anything that could leave a DNA trail. And so it's not meant to replace a third-party tester, but it's for on-site. When you see something that you don't like, normally they say, okay, take a sample and send it to a lab. And so you get a Q-tip, and you put it in a Ziploc bag, and you mail it away, and there's some time involved, and how much does it cost? So this was introduced to NYARM, so for $150 prepaid, we recommend that every building has a handful of these on site. So if the staff is concerned about something that they've engaged in, they can take a swab of it, and then you mail it off, and 24 hours after that, you find out if what it was they were suspected of. Or if you have someone who says, I smell mold, and you keep bringing in the tester, that can get expensive. And so again, it's early detection. And so if you read any of the articles in the last couple of magazines that we've published, Everything is about moving as fast as you possibly can to make sure that you're attending to a situation. Because if you don't, then that's when you're going to be paying a lot more in lawyer's fees than you are for the $150 to get the advance information so you can then rectify the problem.
By the way, we don't object to having to pay more in lawyer fees.
And so with that, absolutely. And so thank you very much. Thank you.